Retro.
Hi, this is Vanessa Marshall, voice of Hera and Rook Cast, and you're listening to Dennis and Jay on Podcast Stardust. Their behavior is continually unexpected.
Welcome to Podcast Stardust. This is the fully armed and operational podcast dedicated to Star Wars news, reviews, and discussion. I'm Dennis Keithley.
And I'm Jay Krebs.
And in this episode, we are going to begin our coverage of Maul Shadowlord with a look at the first two episodes that dropped this past Monday. Before we get into that, Jay, I want to remind everybody where we can be found online.
Absolutely, Dennis. We are on Facebook and Instagram at Podcast Stardust.
Okay, there's a line. The signal's boosted to maximum output. The shield is down, and we're now broadcasting to the galaxy. So let's talk some Maul here. So we got two episodes this past Monday, and I haven't exactly decided how we want to talk about this. If we're going to talk about them together overall, or if we're going to spend some time talking about each episode individually. But before we do that, Jay, just give me your overall thoughts after having watched the two premiere episodes.
Oh, goodness. Where to start? Well, I got to say, from the very first moments, you can feel this show. You know, it seems like it's operating on a totally different vibe than anything before it. I mean, yeah, there's some, callbacks and things from other animation shows and things that we know about Maul, but it feels like it's darker and grittier, but not in a way that feels forced. Pun intended, I guess, if you know what I mean. But there's a weight to it that I think really matches who Maul is at this point in the story. I mean, visually it's stunning. And one of the things that I like about it right from the get-go is that even though ultimately we know what the ending to Maul's story is, this makes you buy into this on a whole different level. And I'm loving all the new characters and just, I can't wait to break it down. So yes, I just think it's amazing so far. What are your initial thoughts?
Oh, yeah. On Monday, when I finally got a chance to sit down and watch this, I was just glued to the set. And I'm trying to think. I mean, since Disney Plus has arrived, we've had Mandalorian, we've had Andor, we've had Ahsoka, we've had a 7th season of the Clone Wars, we've had a bunch of stuff, Bad Batch, whatever. But this might be the best premiere, I think, of any of the shows on Disney Plus. That might be a hot take in some people's opinion, but I just feel like it nailed it on so many levels with this. And it's an animated series, but the story is so good here. The action is fantastic. This is something that they could have done live action, I feel like, with the script if they wanted to, and they could have completely pulled it off. But I am 100% on board with this story. It is it's just exciting, and I cannot wait for next Monday to catch the next two episodes to see what happens next in this. And one of the predictions I had been making in some of the lead up to this over the course of our news episodes was that I felt like they were giving us a lot of the stuff in the trailers from just the first couple episodes. And like a lot of the stuff we saw in the trailers and teasers were not in these first two episodes. I suspect they're going to come up in the next couple episodes. But even that having been said, I don't feel like they really gave away like huge moments or things that were about to happen with the trailers that came out. So this is exciting. I'm really, really thrilled with this. So we already know it's been picked up for a second season, and I can see after watching those first two episodes why they were so confident in this show to go ahead and pick it up for a second season.
Yeah, for sure. Well, like we were saying last week in our news episode, I mean, Star Wars, they know what they've got with this series. And obviously the reaction from the fans, I mean, the Rotten Tomatoes score, if you want to go by that, has been the highest rated of any animated series. So that says a lot. But, Dennis, one of the things that hit me before we get into the breakdown of the discussion is that, this series has been coined as this noir crime kind of, whodunit sort of thing. And it is. But if you look at all the different types of shows that you just mentioned, The Mandalorian and Andor, and even going back to the movies, Star Wars really can do anything. I mean, you've got this
Hmm.
crime noir, and that's one type of genre. You've got The Mandalorian, which is kind of like a Western. You've got Andor, which is more of like a wartime drama. There's so many different subgenres within Star Wars that I don't think any other franchise has ever even come close to doing that. And that is
Yeah.
so cool.
Yeah. So much of Star Wars builds on the samurai movie or the old Western set in space type of thing. But as you pointed out, this has been billed as this crime noir thing, and it really, really sinks into that. It's
100%.
it's got a bit of that, crime scene investigation stuff going on with Captain Brandon Lawson as well, and it pulls it off really well. I was really really impressed with that because it feels authentically Star Wars, but it still feels like a little bit of a different genre for Star Wars,
Mhm. Mhm.
where this you look at it and it's like, oh yeah, this is definitely Star Wars, but it still feels fresh in a way that, and I'm not saying that anything else is stale, but it just seems different enough from so much of the stuff that we've had over the past few years. In a way, I feel like the thing it's closest to is Andor, with
Mhm.
kind of the tone that's been set for it.
Yep, I would agree. And the
Mhm.
fact that you said that, it feels fresh, I put that in, down for myself as well, that just everything feels new in a way. And
Mhm.
even though Maul is the main character, at the same time, he's not, which we were told that that was how it was going to be. And especially with the comics and things, which side note, we need to do those.
Mhm. Yeah.
But it's true. And these side characters and these, everything else that's going on, it's got me hook, line, and sinker for sure.
So let me ask you this question. What do you think of the tone of this episode? This seems to me to be like the most adult of any of the animated series that we have so far, to the extent I think the appropriate age is a bit older than what I would have said for Clone Wars, Rebels, and Bad Batch, and definitely Resistance in this
Mhm.
case. But what's your take on that?
Oh, 100%. Clone Wars was, I think, at the time, very adult without trying to be very adult because there were a lot of things that, as we have said before, especially with the violence and some of the themes and that type of thing, that were a lot more mature. And then they definitely stepped back quite a few paces with Rebels.
Mhm.
And we've talked about they were very, very well planned with how they wanted to show violence, when they wanted to show it. It was very careful and intentional that way. And like you pointed out with Resistance, that was very kiddish. So
Mhm.
now I feel like we're going back in the opposite direction. So I'm almost wondering, even though being an animated show, yes, it's billed for Star Wars fans, but it is definitely more for the adult audience because the themes, the pacing, even the language, just keeping up with the dialogue is a lot more on point with something that an adult would want to watch.
Right. Plot is definitely more adult
Mhm.
than what you would see in a show aimed at kids here. And it's kind of interesting because I know that Dave Filoni has taken the lesson from George Lucas to heart that at its core, Star Wars is made for 12-year-old boys, right? Or 12-year-olds. And I feel like that is the low end of the appropriate range of ages for this show here.
Mhm.
It's
Mhm.
not so gruesome that you couldn't show it to an 8 or 9-year-old. You have to know your kids, clearly. But I just remember coming away from those first two episodes and just seeing a lot of the action. And, there's characters that straight up get shot and we see it. It's not like they cut away from things
Right.
to, the impacts and stuff like that. We do see carnage in this here. It's not super. The other thing I'm watching right now is Daredevil Born Again season 2, and that is definitely rated R with its level of violence and the blood and stuff like that's going on there. It doesn't reach that level, but at the same time, I feel like it's a level above what's come before it. In just to touch on something else that you said, when it comes to the Clone Wars, that was very much a show that grew up with its audience. I
Oh,
think
yeah.
that,
Oh,
you know,
definitely.
the difference between the first and the fifth season, and I'm only talking about the first five because sixth and seventh came much later and in different formats. But that was an episode. It started off much more innocent in the first season compared to where it ended up in season five, when a lot of their audience went from being like around 10 or a little bit younger to teenagers over that course of that time.
Mhm. And to your point, I think that the audience that's tuning into Shadow Lord is also of that same era that grew up with the Clone Wars and are so excited for this show. I
Mhm.
know our sons being some of those for sure. I know Colby Wan, he was so excited for this. He's been posting
Oh,
all kinds of stuff.
yeah. Okay. So let's go ahead and get into these episodes a bit more detail here. So why don't you go ahead and give us the summary for chapter one, The Dark Revenge?
All right. Maul arrives on the planet Janix, seeking revenge on those underworld leaders who profited from his misfortune. To that end, his underlings rob Nicodemus's vault and then frame a rival syndicate leader, Ludi Vario, for the job. In the aftermath of the violence that erupts from their meeting, Captain Brander Lawson and his droid assistant Two Boots begin an investigation. Meanwhile, a pair of refugee Jedi, Devon Izara and her master Iko Diodaki, struggle to make their way after Order 66, and Devon is arrested for stealing food. When Ludi Vario ends up in custody and Devon witnesses Maul attack the police station to recover him.
Right. So good introductory episode here, and it puts everything in place. And I don't think it creates a whole lot of mystery here. That's one of the things I appreciate about this show is that you and I had talked about whether this is going to be episodic or whether it was going to have a story arc that goes over the course of the season. And it does seem like now they're going for the season long story arc type of thing. That's not to say that certain things won't be tied up at the end of each episode, but Maul's on Janix. He wants to get revenge against some of the syndicate leaders that tried to fill this vacuum after what happened to him. When we last saw him in the Clone Wars, when Darth Sidious was telling him he's no longer his apprentice, but don't worry, he's got plans for him. And then, of course, there's the Son of Dathomir comic, which was based on other uncompleted episodes of the Clone Wars here. And so there's this revenge thing going on. You got a couple Jedi that have survived Order 66, and they're laying low on Janix, trying to avoid the Empire, who doesn't seem to have a presence there at this time. And then we've got the various criminal syndicates that are reacting to what Maul is doing here. So what did you think? We've talked about Maul a little bit, and we've talked about him a lot over the course of this podcast. What did you think about Devin and Eco Dio?
Well, right away, of course, I love Iko Diodaki. I just think that he is such a cool Jedi master. He
Mhm.
almost gives me some vibes of the High Republic Jedi in a lot of ways. I don't know what it is about him, but obviously these two are survivors of Order 66, like we said, and they picked Janix, I think, because of the fact that it was sort of outside that imperial presence kind of thing, not as much as what some of the other systems and things are. So they're really trying to avoid detection, and they're really fending for their daily existence at this point.
Mhm.
Devin, tells her master, "You need to eat." And Master Diodaki is very willing to rely on the strangers and their ability to be nice to them, and Devin is really struggling with that. She's like, "I
Mhm.
need to survive. We need to eat. We are past all of this." But yet I think she's at this transitionary stage, because as we see later on, she wants to defend the ideals of what the Jedi stand for, but yet she's also having to deal with her basic needs at this point not being met. And so she's at a real crossroads, and I think she wants to do right, but she's also being pulled in the opposite direction. But I just think they're very, very awesome characters. My first
Yeah.
impressions. What do you think?
Oh, I liked him as well. I think it was cool to see Dennis Haysbert get a role in Star Wars as Eco Diodaki. And there's one moment that stood out to me from him, and this is going to sound small, but you were just talking about how they're hungry, and he wants to rely on the charity of strangers, but he looks over at that stand, that stall where some fruit and stuff are being sold, and you can just see the desire, how hungry he is with the expression he
Mhm.
makes when he goes, oh, how his face changes. I was like, that was like a masterclass in animation right there, getting across something. It was so apparent. You did not need Devin saying afterwards, "You're hungry." I mean, she did,
Right.
but you could just tell by the way he looked over there that he's starving and he would really like to have some of that food. And so she's willing to go take some because, as she points out, they'll never miss it. One of the things you brought up is how, she's kind of at a crossroads here. I'm really curious about this character. I know from the trailers we've seen, she's going to be receptive, at least to some degree, to teaming up with Maul as the season goes on. But in this, stealing for survival is kind of a not a big Jedi thing. Now, I want to be careful with that because I'm just thinking about Obi-Wan Kenobi. We see him like helping himself to the food that they're carving up there on Tatooine, right? But
Mhm, mhm.
but just the but at least in his case, I feel like he's taking advantage of an unjust master in that regard, whereas Devin is willing to prey upon people who are almost as misfortunate as they are in this case. And as these two episodes go on, I think she's coming off to me like she's reciting some of these Jedi ideals, but she's starting to get a bit disillusioned with them because look where they've ended up in this.
Right.
And I'm kind of thinking, I'm also jumping into the next episode that Maul is hitting the right notes with his attempt to recruit her.
Oh, for sure, and he's saying all the right things. He's not,
Mhm.
and that's the thing about Maul is he's so silky smooth with that kind of thing, and I think a lot of that comes from the fact of how he was treated as an apprentice, and
Mhm.
then we, of course, see that go forward even into Rebels too.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, with Devin, I think it'll be interesting if they do any kind of sort of flashback to her experience with Order 66 and is Master Ikodio really her master, or did she just sort of end up with him? And, what is her little backstory? Because you know me and backstories. I love them.
Sure.
So I'd
Yeah.
love to know it.
So after some of this carnage here, where Maul has shown up and they basically are stealing from Nicodemus. Okay, what that name, Nicodemus? Is it a take on Nicodemus, which is a fairly popular name in fantasy and sci-fi, and not to mention it's a biblical character there. But what do you think? I mean, is it just a coincidence, or were they deliberate with that choice?
Oh, I'm sure it was probably deliberate. And yeah, I hadn't actually made that connection until I had seen something else. Someone else had posted something about that as well. But I think that that's probably, I mean, I feel like nothing in Star Wars is ever by accident, you know?
Hmm.
If not, it's a very big coincidence for sure.
Yeah, I don't want to get off on a tangent into religion here, but Nicodemus in the Bible is a supporter of Christ there.
Mhm.
And so I have to admit, I am not super versed on everything that's in the Bible, but I did do a little bit of research into this character. And so trying to figure out if there was some symbolism going here, and I really couldn't put two and two together with that.
Mhm.
So hopefully someone who's more intelligent in that realm will be able to fill us in somewhere. But it was just kind of funny because after I was writing the notes, I was like Nicodemus, Nicodemus, and I said Nicodemus. I was like, no, wait, that's not right. Like, wait a minute, Nicodemus. So think of like the Secret of Nem or the Rats of Nem
Oh, there you
was the
go.
Nicodemus name. But it's like this guy is a gangster. He's violent and he's having a mafia style sit down with a rival gangster to find out what he knows about his vault getting robbed there, which was kind of cool because I know it's like some of the this is the noir part of what they've been talking about with Maul operating in the background and setting these two crime lords against each other there.
Oh, yeah.
And Ludivario and Nicodemus have this meal, and one ends up shooting the other one. uh, Ludi makes me laugh, and part of it is because he's voiced by the same person who's currently the voice actor for Mickey Mouse. But he shows up in this mech suit, and it's Alina, one of those little characters that was in the pod race back in the
Mhm.
Phantom Menace here. But he's doesn't let his size or anything disadvantage him here. He dishes it out to Nicodemus, no problem.
Oh, yeah. And can we talk about that meeting really quickly? Because
Mm-hmm.
I just thought it was amazing. They had the little toast with the chobasa and choba, which
Mm-hmm.
reminded me a lot of from Andor. And I can't remember the exact words that they used, where there was the toast that they said the one word and then the opposite
Oh
in
yeah, yeah.
response to it.
Right. Yeah.
So it reminded me of that. But the food that they were eating looked like chicken parm to
That's
me.
actually in the trivia for this
Is it
episode.
really? Oh my gosh,
Yeah,
see, I didn't get that far.
that was actually deliberate.
Okay.
So
That is
yeah.
great. I love that. Well, and you know what? One more thing too, stepping back really quickly to what you were saying about the names and being intentional. To me, Ludivario also means like Vario means a lot and Ludi, like he loots a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So that
Yeah.
makes sense. And then we've got Icarus, which is one of the two Zabrak thugs that were working with Maul, who is the um, mythological creature that flies too close to the sun. So you've
Yeah.
got all of these little references, and I think that's really cool.
Voiced by Steve Bloom, no less, neither.
Yeah.
And the exchange you're thinking of is Sigrona Tima from
Nice.
Andor.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank
There you
you.
go. All right. And then we also get introduced to Captain Brander Lawson during this episode. He's investigating this whole thing. And I love his voice and his accent. It's so cool
Mhm. Mhm.
here. And his partner is Two Boots, a droid who wears two boots, voiced by Richard Ayoade, who did the voice for Zero in The Mandalorian back in season 1. And they discover they don't know Maul, which is interesting because Devin does know who Maul is, but the average person does not. But when they finally figure out, they get an image from a droid that was destroyed in the heist, and they access its memory banks, and they get this image of Maul. When they try to run it, it comes back as classified, and they're supposed to report it to the Empire, which he does not do. He wants to keep the Empire
Mhm.
out of this because he knows that they'll come in and lock down the planet. But and he's working hard on this. He's really, really concerned about this. And so I don't know, there's a lot that I spit out there. What's your take on all of this? And he seems to recognize what nobody else does, that this is something that they need to solve because they don't want the Empire coming in and taking all this over. It won't be good for anybody. But everyone else is just like, we need to report this up the chain. That's what we're supposed to do. So what do you think's behind all this?
Yeah, well, a few observations. First of all, when Brander Lawson comes on the scene, the first thing you see him do is run his hand through his hair. And he does
Mhm.
that again a little later. So I love the fact that they're giving his character his own little personal tick, if you will,
You know what
that
the other one
is
is?
unique to him. What's that?
Coffee. He's always drinking
Oh,
calf.
yes. Oh, yeah, for
He
sure.
always has a cup of calf nearby.
And the dude needs a travel mug, let's just say that,
Mhm.
because he's using an open calf mug in his speeder, but at any rate. So when a few things that I find that I'm interested in knowing the answers to is that they don't know who the Shadow Collective is. So he'd never heard of the Shadow Collective. Like you pointed out, he doesn't know who Maul is. Devin does, but I have, another thing to say about that later on. But there's a lot of these underworld kinds of pieces of information that has never been brought to his attention. And is it because they really don't know about it collectively, or is it that he hasn't been privy to that information? And then the second thing about this whole thing as well is that with him being portrayed as this real person, family man kind of thing, you don't just see the side of him that is all about the business. You see the softer side in his family. And we'll get into more details with that as well. So he just becomes a really likable character. And then Two Boots, of course, I love me the droids. I'm already loving this droid so much. He seems to be like the comrade that Lawson needs to be his counterpart human, even though he's not human because he wears the boots. And then there's that one scene where he has the calf and he says, "Oh, you know I can't drink it. I'm just sharing a moment with you."
Yeah.
Loved
I love
that.
that.
Loved that so much. So, yeah, so I'm not sure, especially being on Janix, and obviously, like you said, he's working so hard. He wants to know what's going on. He wants to do the best, but yet he also wants to be a little bit autonomous, as you pointed out, not bringing the empire in. Like he wants to handle it himself. He keeps saying, "This is a local issue." It's
Yeah.
not, but
Well,
he wants to keep it as local as possible because he wants to deal with it.
see, I wasn't so certain that it was a territory thing for him. It's just that he seems to know that if the Empire comes in, it's not going to be good for anybody in the
Mhm.
situation. He seems to be wise in that way. I think his ignorance when it comes to the Shadow Collective is that he's on Janix. This is a planet we're just hearing about for the first time, which it's really cool the way it's described on Stars.com. This city is built into a crater on this otherwise jungle planet. And that's just really cool. And they did a fantastic job. They always point out that the city was modeled after Gotham from Batman, which was
Yeah.
also a pretty cool touch there. But it's kind of like the gang war has come to Janix. It's come to a place where it hasn't existed before. Yes, they've got Nicodemus and Ludivario and the likes there, but in the grand scheme of galactic criminal syndicates, they're kind of on the lower end of things. But Maul has shown up and is bringing a gang war with him in this case. And so now he's suddenly getting indoctrinated in all this stuff where really the only people that need to know about the Shadow Collective were Mandalorians because they operated on Mandalore, the Jedi because Maul was at the head of this. And so, that's how Devin apparently knows about him. And
Mhm.
then other criminal syndicates that run in these areas. And, that one contact that he goes to meet, Rena Sewell, who kind of runs that, it looks like a nightclub type of a place. One of the
Mhm.
things that she says in the second episode, and I'm going to have you read the description here in just a second so we can kind of blend our discussion of the two episodes, is like the one thing she's glad about is that she never made a deal with Maul in that because she had the foresight to say, if things go wrong, this is not a guy who you want to have, be on his bad side for.
Right, right. And I have to say, she is so cool, and I wanna see more of her, and I have a feeling that we will.
Yeah, definitely.
So, very cool.
Well, before we get too much farther in this conversation, why don't you go ahead and read us the summary for episode 2, and then we can get into more themes and kind of talk about both episodes a little more freely now.
Yeah, because 'cause we've got a lot of other characters we haven't even touched upon yet, so here we
Yeah.
go. Maul and his allies make their escape from the police headquarters on Janix with Ludivario and Devon as their prisoners. After a pursuit in the streets, they finally make it back to Maul's secret subterranean base. There, Maul extorts information on the Pike spice smuggling operations from Vario, and then returns his attention to recruiting Devon as a new apprentice. Meanwhile, Lawson works to keep his investigation into Maul and Shadow Syndicate under wraps to prevent the Empire from shutting down Janix.
Yeah. One of the things we didn't touch on is that when Devin attempts to steal the fruit and she gets caught, she gets arrested because she's not really like answering any questions. And what I found interesting about this is that I don't know about you, but I've occasionally my social media feed will have like arrest videos and stuff like that, and that'll come across it. And one of the things I notice a lot of times, like these petty theft type stuff, people will, and sometimes homeless, it's just like, okay, take me in. No, I'm not going to give you a whole lot of information. No, I'm not going to cooperate. Just throw me in a cell. I'll spend the night here, and then you'll let me go with a citation to show up later. And that's exactly what she's doing in this situation. Now, she's got something to hide, that she's a Jedi and she's wanted by the Empire, but it's very much a situation where it's like, I'm not going to cooperate. I'm not going to give you more information so that you can't look into me. It's just, let's do what we got to do so I can get out of here tomorrow. And then while she's there, she meets Maul. And it's another side, the excellent cinematography, how cinematic they make this series. There's a number of instances where we're introduced to a character because we see their shadow coming from the foreground
Mhm.
into the middle ground, and they did it with Maul, and they did it with I can't remember who else in this episode, but that's what happens. Maul goes to the police headquarters to recover Ludivario, and while he's there, he finds his potential new apprentice along the way.
Right. And a few things about some of the observations that you just made, which, Master Ikodio tells her, just go, you'll be out in no time, just cooperate. But yet, how can she cooperate when she has
Mhm.
nothing to cooperate with? As you pointed out, she's not going to be able to give them any kind of ID. She's not going to be able to allow them to have any kind of information on her because she's on the move, as Obi-Wan might say. And so what did Ikodio expect to happen once she was brought into custody? You know what I
I
mean?
think it
Like,
no, I think his intention was, we are Jedi. We're not going to attempt to run here. Let's not. If they try to elude the authorities, they're going to bring more attention to themselves. So
mhm,
if she just surrenders and gets taken in, she'll get released the next day, no matter what
mhm,
she does. It's petty
mhm,
theft. It's a couple pieces of fruit. It's not like she stole a speeder in that
right,
situation. It is all about being compliant in drawing as little attention to themselves as possible. She already screwed up by trying to the theft, even though he said, no, we'll rely on the charity of strangers. But it
mhm,
is just she's there. And, on the one hand, she kind of comes off as a surly teenager who's been apprehended. But at the same time, she's not giving them anything, which is like, if she starts identifying herself, just like with Maul, it's going to come up with classified, contact the Empire,
right,
and that'll bring the Inquisitors in. So she's smart. This is a planet, at least for the moment, until Maul showed up, that they could hide out on.
mhm. And it is kind of interesting too. I mean, I guess they can't have the facial recognition for every single Jedi that was at the temple, but do you think that if they would have run something like that on Devon, that maybe she would have come up in a Jedi archive kind of
She might
thing,
have, yeah. But
and he
see,
just
this
never
is a
bothered to
difference,
do it?
right? Maul is present at the scene of a huge bank heist that had casualties. All
Yeah,
Devin did was steal some fruit. So
true.
he wants to do is just process her and move her along. He's not even
Right.
all that interested in, getting criminal justice for her. It's just
Mhm.
he's going through the motions with her. He wants to get back to investigating Maul in this situation. He has no idea. Now, what is interesting, I'm using that phrase a lot tonight, but later in this episode, when there's that clash between Maul and his henchmen and the authorities, and Maul brings down that walkway to try and distract, to cover their getaway. Eco Dio uses the Force to lift up that walkway and put everything back in place. And Brander Lost is right there and witnesses it. He knows there's a Jedi here on Janix now, but for the rest of the episode, he doesn't say anything about it. To
Mhm.
him, it's just, at one point he even asked that guy, "You doing okay, buddy?" or something like along those lines. So it seems to me he's aware of everything that's at stake with even though he doesn't know Devin is a Jedi. That oh, there's a Jedi here, and he's not interested in even turning that in over to the Empire.
Yeah, yeah. No, good points. Good points. And another thing too, I wanted to say about the use of the shadows. Obviously, it's called Shadow Lord, and so I think that a lot of that was intentional. But when Maul does come into the frame and Devin looks up at him and just simply says Maul, that to me gives off like the old Nosferatu type,
Mm-hmm.
like the old horror movie sort of things. I love that. And to that point as well, she obviously knew who Maul was. So they must have been not teaching them at the temple about who he was, but obviously he was probably the subject of a lot of the old fairy tales. You know what I mean? And cautionary
Briefings of them.
tales and
Yeah.
briefings. Yeah, that too. Well, it's the thing of it is though, is obviously, after the Clone Wars, things kind of escalated with him. So he's one of those that you just when you think he's gone, he's not gone. And so yeah, I think briefing is probably the better
Yeah.
word for that.
I'm sure Obi-Wan returned from Mandalore and word got around that Maul's
Yeah.
back, if not
Mhm.
before then. But so let's talk, we've talked a lot about everyone else. We haven't focused a lot on Maul here. Let's talk about him for a little bit. So he's got this revenge scheme. He's going to get revenge against everyone who's profited from his misfortune, including Darth Sidious here. And he also deems it necessary to find an apprentice. And so he set his sight on Devon, and he's going to fashion her into a weapon. That's from the trailer and stuff like that. What do you think about all this? I mean, to me, he's using a lot of the same tactics that we will see him use later, like with Ezra and Rebels here. But why is he so bent on getting an apprentice here in this situation? Why is it so necessary to his revenge?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm wrestling with that quite honestly, because one of the things that I think about a lot is that Maul was one of the only people in the galaxy who knew that Sidious was Palpatine, Palpatine is Sidious. Why didn't he just come out with that information?
Mhm.
So I don't know, like, what is it about that situation that he feels that he needs to go about having an apprentice and beating Sidious at his own game instead of just being done with him?
Yeah. Well, I think when he knew it originally, he was still interested in possibly reclaiming his role as Sith apprentice because when we just talked about the behind the scenes thing Dave Filoni did, and the scene was where Sidious came to Mandalore to challenge Maul and Savage Opress. And Maul's reaction was like, I feel a presence that I've not felt. And he's like, Master. And when Sidious walks in the room, he kneels before him. I think
Mhm.
he still had some designs of reclaiming his spot. And so, outing Sidious in that instance wouldn't have done him any good. And then Maul kind of ended up as a prisoner after that. So he didn't have a whole lot of opportunities. And after that, he was on the run. So what good would it be for Maul to spill the beans on this to a galaxy who's out to get him anyway? But at any rate, I'm just really interested in this. He's fascinated, it's not the right word, but he really is making a calculated play to convert Devon here. He
Mhm.
says things like, it's time you learn the truth about the galaxy. I can teach you things that the Jedi did not. Kind of similar to what Sidious said to Anakin.
Mhm.
It's just and the thing is that he also is not forcing it on her. It's like, she says like, he says like, you're free to leave. And or who are you? And she says like, I'm a prisoner. And he's, well, if that's what you think, then you can go to a cell. But otherwise, he's perfectly willing to let her go, to have autonomy, to wander around his hideout. But
Mhm.
he's kind of like making her make these decisions there. What do you think about that?
Yeah, and as much as we've often called Sidious the puppeteer, Maul is just a game maker. He has people in certain areas of his chessboard, and he's able to play them in ways that other people just simply could not. And you're right, he says all the right things to Devon. He doesn't push her. He calls her Jedi, but not in a way that, a lot of times when he says Jedi, he says it with
Mhm.
such disdain. And in this way, he's just kind of stating a fact and basically saying, this is who you say you are, but are you really? And like you said, he invites her to leave. You can leave, Jedi, if that's what you wish. And it causes her to rethink or unlearn what she has learned. She tries to go out the front of the cell and she ends up figuring out a different way to do it, which is exactly what he wanted. And
Mhm.
so, at the end, when you see her sort of looking back, of course, we know she's going to be sticking around in some capacity, but you know that the words are getting to her. So Maul
Yeah.
is just so good at manipulation in the way that I think he's trying to give almost the choice in a way that he didn't get as an apprentice, but also in a lot of ways what Darth Bane did, as as we're looking through that book again, in that she also has to be kind of deserving of being his apprentice and almost want to be there.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. He's definitely trying to make her make the choice here. It's
Right.
not something he's going to force on her because that leads to resistance. But that conversation they have towards the end of the episode, um, he says, you can leave anytime that you like. And she doesn't think it's just possible because you're a prisoner. And then his response is, if that is your point of view, and if I may be so bold, that greatly concerns me. I
Mhm.
can show you a pathway to power the Jedi didn't teach you. And he later asks her, what does it mean to you to be a Jedi, guardians of peace and justice in a time of lawlessness? kind of sowing this notion that you're supposed to be this one thing, but how can you possibly do that at this time? So maybe you should consider a career change. And her response, as you've pointed out, is, I still believe in those principles. And then he says, if only there were more like you, perhaps things wouldn't be the way they are today. And that's one of the things that Sam Witwer and Dave Filoni were talking about in the promotion for this, is that, at this point, Maul is not impressed by the Empire because it is without scruples, it's without principles. Whereas the Jedi, even though he disagreed with them, they at least had principles. We made that Hamilton reference. We were talking about Darth Bane a few weeks ago, and I just happened to be listening to the soundtrack for that today. And when Hamilton was asked whether he was going to endorse Jefferson or Burr, he points out he never agreed with Jefferson, but at least he has principles, and Burr has none. Yes. And so, that's why he endorsed Jefferson. And it made me think of that. Good timing, just fortuitous. I was listening to that while driving.
Once again, yes. Good Hamilton reference.
And then he goes on to say, you're operating under the premise that I am somehow the villain here, but it is not as simple as good and evil. And how can I prove to you that we are on the same side? So that's some thought-provoking stuff. And this notion that they're on the same side, I'm not sure that that's really true. They might have a similar goal, which is to defeat the Empire, but it's for completely different reasons. Maul he's set, from the first episode and the second episode, he's talking about revenge, the people that have wronged him. Whereas, if you ask Devin, and her views on this may change by the end of this season, or Iko Dio, it is, they are these guardians of justice and peace and the like, and the Empire stands in the way of that. And so therefore the Empire needs to be toppled. But that's not what Maul's interested in. Those type of things. He wanted to rule. That's why he built a whole Shadow Collective to begin with.
Mm-hmm. And for Devin, I think too, we said she's at this crossroads. She's just experienced Order 66, and seeing how her ideals were really turned on their head, and the people that she thought she could trust, she couldn't. And everything fell down around her, and the Jedi were being called out as being the criminals and being against the Republic. So where does she stand? And when Maul says, you've been indoctrinated since you were a child, now you must adapt, I think that's kind of speaking to her in a lot of ways, because I'm sure she does have these doubts about where she is in this whole scheme of things. And even though she's reciting that kind of mantra of, this is what I am and this is what I believe in, and I still believe in those ideals, and I truly do believe that she believes it, but the way that Maul is playing this with, somehow I'm the villain here, but it's not as simple as good and evil. That's the same way that every quote unquote bad person feels. They don't think they're doing bad for the sake of doing bad. And that's where he's coming from.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, as he points out, it's like, I'm not the villain. It's the way you're defining all of this, exactly. It's not so much, they have a common villain, the whole thing is a common enemy, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. But the problem is that they're also enemies. Maul was a Sith. Maul did kill Jedi. Maul killed other Jedi. And so I can see why Devin's resistant. But unlike Iko Dio, she has not had the long life in the Jedi Order living up to these ordeals. And as Maul pointed out, she has been indoctrinated. That was a good call out by you. But I don't think it resonates for her quite the same way, which is, she's talking about, we need to survive. This galaxy is against us. Let's get food. They'll never miss it. We need it more than they do. Those type of things. And it's a bit of a cliche, but this whole, teenage, I want to put things right. I may not be able to get back what I have, but I can at least get revenge. I think you're right. I think that is appealing to her, whether she realizes it right now or not.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And Maul is kind of her ticket to being able to do that, or at least being able to figure it out for herself without the constructs of everything that's come before.
I got to tell you, shifting gears here, breakout character for me from this series is Spybot.
Yes.
I love that character. Talk about Two Boots is a great droid, but Spybot is the Maul companion droid that just steals the show, I think, a bunch of times.
Oh yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up because I know we'll still need to talk about recast yet, but with
Hmm.
Spybot, my first inclination was that this just reminds me of one of the Transformers from the
Hmm.
movies, the little
Yeah.
with the attitude, but his little phrases that he comes up with and just the humor, the knock knock and the bushkidoo and the peekaboo. And then at
Yep.
one point when he's trying to like outwork Two Boots in the elevator and he's going, "Ah, ah, ah." I'm like, "Oh, Jurassic Park callback right there. That's perfect."
Right. Yeah.
And then the way he purrs when Maul, like, pets him. Oh my gosh. Yeah, such a great little character.
Hmm. We could talk about him more, but I want to make sure we get a few other things covered before we wrap up this episode. You brought up Rook Cast here, voiced by our friend Vanessa Marshall, and
Mhm.
so it's good to see her getting more Star Wars work. What did you think about her?
Well, obviously she is his second
Hmm.
because when she talks to Maul, she doesn't talk to him necessarily as an equal, but she's definitely not a hired hand. I mean, she's so many steps up above the Zabrak
She's the
brothers.
consigliere, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so I think that she's very smart and she's very knowledgeable obviously about a lot of the battle types of things and weaponry and all of those things. My only question is how did she get out of prison? Did Maul break her out? Because the last time we saw her, she was on her knees being arrested in season 7 of the Clone Wars, correct?
Yeah, we got a big gap with, you
Yeah.
know, because Maul was arrested in season 7 of Clone Wars, then he shows up in Son of Dathomir after that, and then he loses there and runs off. I mean, there's a lot of gaps to be filled there that we just don't
Mhm.
have answers for.
Mhm. But overall, she's a great character. Very dark, very menacing, very a perfect companion to Maul. Let's just put it that way. What do you
Yeah.
think?
I like her a lot. She's very curious about what Maul is up to and very um considerate in the way that she really contemplates everything that's going on, because this she's inquisitive, like, well, why are we taking this Jedi? You want to recruit
Mhm.
her, a Jedi, as your apprentice, my lord? Should we think this through? That type of a thing. But she also doesn't like call him out on his decisions. She seems to be like the perfect second to Maul, which is, I gotta ask, but what you're thinking, and then he explains it, and then she's not confrontational with him in that way. So
Right.
uh
Right.
be
And he
interested to see.
obviously go ahead.
No, I'll just be interested to see what how that ends up working out, and over the course of the series.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. But
Right.
what I was thinking was he obviously trusts her because she even says to him, "You're having another vision." So obviously he's confided in her about the things that he's experienced and seen, and she's not at all judgmental about it. She's just like you said, she's inquisitorious, not
Mhm.
not the same as the inquisitors, but she's, wanting to be there to support him in any way that she can in his machinations.
Right. All right. So we've gone a bit long, so we should go ahead and start wrapping this up. And lots of things we haven't got to, but there's still got 8 more episodes of this to discuss over before the series runs. So we'll be able to revisit some things here. Just got to call out the action here. Maul is performing in this in a way that we've never seen before. I mean, just as great as his fight with Ahsoka was at the end of season 7 of the Clone Wars, I just thought his action was a whole new level here that was so fast. The way he spun that blade around and did things. He got his own hallway scene, just like Vader
Oh,
from Rogue
yeah.
One. Um, Not sure. I think it's action wise, it's more impressive, but it didn't quite have the music and the set, showing up out of the dark with the red lightsaber glowing that made Vader's appearance in Rogue One so impressive. But still, it worthy of its own due in that regard.
Oh, for sure, and so brutal.
Yeah.
Definitely a lot more acrobatic than Vader. My favorite move was where he goes up the side of the hallway, and then you see that trail from his lightsaber as he kinda comes around and then slices him down. And did you notice too, when he pulled, Larson's pistol out of his hand, it was definitely, uh, Empire Strikes Back vibes on Cloud City. when
Yeah.
Vader did that to Han. But, but he left Lawson alive, which obviously for the show it needed to happen, but you kind of wonder, what the heck? Like, why did he do that? But other than that, the action was just amazing and brutal. We were talking about at the very beginning, is this a kid's show? And obviously Darth Maul is brutal, not Darth Maul anymore, Maul, just Maul these days. Just he's brutal, but yeah, it's top-notch action for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Fantastic. Gets an A from me if I'm going to put a grade on these things. Could not get enough of this. And like I said earlier, I cannot wait till Monday to get the next 2 episodes. So any other last thoughts before we go ahead and wrap this up?
Well, I just think it was so cool the way that they are setting all of this up with the different types of crime syndicates, with the
Mhm.
Pikes. And then we've got, of course, in the first episode with our 2 crime lords. And then the beginnings of how this is going to end up with, obviously, down the road with Crimson Dawn. And I just think that it's such a well thought out show in so many ways. And it's just smart. It's a smart show and it's beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. This is everything I could have hoped for. It was fantastic. So,
Mhm.
okay. Well then, make sure that you join us next week when we get to the next 2 episodes of this. And thank you all for joining us for this episode of Podcast Stardust as we've begun our discussion of Maul Shadow Lord. This has been a lot of fun. I think this is going to keep Star Wars fans talking for some time. It's collected a lot of great reviews from critics and fans alike. And if you want to be there for our coverage and join in on the conversation, make sure you subscribe to the podcast on your podcatcher of choice. We'd love it if you'd rate and review the show while you're at it, and that would be greatly helpful to us. And then if you want to catch the back catalog of the show's all previous 1018 episodes, best place to do that is over at retrozap.com, which is home to the rest of that podcast network featuring a bunch of other great shows, mainly Enjoy Stuff and Anime Cast these days are the other 2 that are really active. Jay, you want to go ahead and remind everybody what our social media contacts are and where else we can be found online?
I would love to. So we are very easily found on Facebook and Instagram at Podcast Stardust. And you can also check out the ton of Pinterest boards that we have set up for ideas for everything Star Wars. And then you can also listen to us on both YouTube and YouTube Music. No video, just the audio. But we'd love it if you would subscribe and share those out with your friends as well. And if you'd like to drop us a line, let us know what you thought of Shadow Lord or anything else. You can do that at podcaststardust@gmail.com. And if you are in need of some new Podcast Stardust merch, you can head over to TeePublic. The link is going to be in our show notes, and you can choose from one of 7 different show logo designs on all kinds of really fun products.
All right. What's going on in cosplay?
All right. Well, as usual, you can catch my Instagram, j.snipscosplay, where I am mostly Ahsoka from Clone Wars seasons 3 through 5. But you can also catch me as some other Star Wars characters, including the 4th Sister Inquisitor, my original concept Mandalorian, and 2 different versions of Hera.
Okay. Upcoming on the show on Monday, we'll be getting into some recent Star Wars news. And then on Wednesday, it's our monthly feature, World Between Worlds, where Jay is going to round up the latest from Star Wars fashion and lifestyle products and tell us all about those. So, with that said, thanks for listening to episode 1019 of Podcast Stardust, everyone. Have a great weekend. And until next time, may the Force be